to Sharonville City Council meeting. I'm going to call it to order. If everyone would please stand, we're going to have a moment of silent prayer, and then Mr. Tankersley is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I ask everyone to keep the families who lost loved ones in Nashville in your prayers. Thank you. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You can be seated. Roll call.
Mr. Tankersley?
Here.
Mr. Wilson?
Here.
Mr. Coulter?
Here.
Mr. Lovett?
Here.
Mr. Cook?
Here.
Mrs. Knight? Here. Mr. Schmidt?
Here.
Thank you. Minutes from our March 14th regular council meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? Seeing none, those stand as written and distributed. Reports and communication, Mayor Hardman.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we had our employee recognition breakfast, and so part of that, we recognize folks who have been serving us for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35 on up years of service to the city of Sharonville, and we give out pens for folks that have been with us over those periods of time. Unfortunately, because of some delay on the part of the folks that we buy the pens from, they didn't come in time for us to distribute it that morning, but we did recognize folks, and those pens arrived literally that afternoon. But I had the pleasure this evening to share with Kurt Irie and Dave Cook their pens for Kurt's 5 years of service with us and Dave's 10 years of service with the city of Sharonville. So thank you, gentlemen, for your service and your continued service to Sharonville.
Thank you.
We had a busy weekend at our Sharonville Convention Center, and I know Jim is still riding a high from the record-setting food and beverage that was sold as a result of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Cobra Kai and other various wonderful folks joining the fun at our convention center for a Horror Hound weekend. It's great to see that back in full steam. In light of where we've been the last few years, I think everybody who was there looked to be having a great time and a wonderful time. And hopefully all of our surrounding hotels and food establishments were also enjoying the extra visitors around Chester Road this past weekend. I know it was also a busy weekend for our police department, not just because of all those visitors that are here, but other things going on, as well as our fire department this weekend. I think our fire chief actually spent a 24-hour shift over there. I think all of his firefighters are telling him, please don't ever do that again, in light of some of the things they dealt with over the weekend. But it is certainly good to know that we have great folks that work for us that continue to provide for the safety of all of our residents, all of our visitors, and all of our businesses to our community. So I just want to recognize them for all their hard work. That is all I have for this evening, unless there are any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to our Safety Service Director, Mr. Lucas.
Thank you. Just one thing before the legislation. The time may be problematic for some of you, but just a reminder that this Friday from noon to 2 is Vicki Elsbrock's retirement party at City Hall. She's been with us for a very long time and really a key cog in what we do at City Hall, and she'll be missed. As of tomorrow, I think, or Thursday, or okay, tomorrow, we have hired somebody else and to replace her, and she'll be shadowing Vicki tomorrow, I guess. So, legislation-wise, it's the Steve Bosom and Scott McKeon show primarily. Steve's here to talk about 5 pieces of legislation: Ordinance 2023-19, 26, 27, 28, and 29.
Goodness.
Did you? That's better. All right. Several ordinances tonight. The first being 2023-19. It's establishing the policy for the repair and replacement of resident mailboxes, which were damaged by snowplow efforts. So going into the year this year, our policy was administrative, and it was to repair or replace as we could. We could replace with a standard 4x4 post and a black mailbox, or the resident could come and be reimbursed for the cost of a mailbox up to $80. Tonight, I'm asking you to consider the ordinance that would keep that in it, but also add in that on a one-time basis per property owner. If they did not agree to either of those options, they could come for a different, possibly more expensive option, considering they didn't necessarily know that they had a mailbox more expensive than what we would replace, but then they're put on notice, basically, that this is the one time that we're going to replace it at a higher cost. Otherwise, they revert back to what our standard policy is, which is a 4x4 wood post with a metal box, or up to $80 in reimbursement. I'm asking that you guys, you all put it into an ordinance. That way it puts the power in your guys' hands as opposed to in our hands. So that, and it's there. We can say it's an ordinance. So, any questions? On a regular basis, it really depends year to year how many mailboxes we may damage. Primarily it's by snow coming off, so it's the heavier snows. The sleet event we had last year, we had a few. This year we had a real heavy snow, and just the force of the snow coming off the plow will knock them over on occasion. So we're dealing with half a dozen, maybe 10 boxes a year.
Something I do want to mention that's in there also is the post office actually has a legal way to
Yes.
put the mailbox in it where it belongs, and we're going to enforce that also.
Yeah, any box that we replace will go back to post office standards in terms of how far back off the curb and heights.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
All right, 2023-26E. This would allow the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract for the design for the Mosteller Road improvements. This is what we went after OPWC award money for, and we're denied, and then we're given a little bit of money, and then we're given the rest of the money. And then from Jobs and Commerce, we're given another $100,000 towards this project. So this particular ordinance would be to allow us to enter into contract for the design of the work, to bid the work, and then to enter into a contract with a contractor that is lowest and best, assuming they're within the 10% threshold of the engineer's estimate. This is Mosteller Road from basically the 275 ramps to Crescentville, right there at the railroad tracks to Crescentville. Any questions? All right. Let's see. 2027E is authorizing Safety Service Director to enter into contract for the construction of sidewalk on Lebanon Road from Cottingham up to the Anchor properties. We came last year actually with an ordinance that was basically the same. However, we didn't have the right of entry for the property from the property owners at that time, and we were unable to successfully retrieve all of those rights of entry. Kleinger's went back to the drawing board, the one property that we could not come into communication with, and redesigned the project to eliminate the need for that right of entry from that property. And then, as with everything, it took a little bit more time, so the construction estimate has gone up. But we're ready to go ahead on out to bid with that project. So this would allow us to bid and enter into a contract with lowest and best. Any questions? Okay. Let's see, 28E. Similar, this is allowing the Safety Service Director, Jim, to enter into a contract for the design of Kemper Road path repaving. This is the SORTA grant that we applied for and received. It's repaving the existing bike path on Kemper Road from 42 to almost Mosteller, with some intersection improvements for mobility and a little bit of sidewalks for better access to some of the metro stops, which are on the north side of Kemper Road. Path's on the south side. It's currently an asphalt path. It would be a mill and overlay project on that path with some improvements to the addition of curb ramps and a couple of intersection improvements for crossings to the metro stops. Questions? And finally, I think finally, yep, 29. 2023-29E would authorize Safety Service Director to enter into a contract with Finders Group for a feasibility study for construction of a sidewalk on the north side of Fields Erdel Road between Reed Hartman and Macaulay. This is simply a feasibility study, some preliminary design, and up to 3 different layouts of sidewalk to get a better estimate of what the construction cost would be of that sidewalk. This would potentially tie in sidewalk that's being added with the Hamilton County project, Macaulay and Conray, and the existing sidewalk to the west of Reed Hartman. Any questions? That's enough of me talking.
As Scott's getting his way up here, Casey's going to talk about 2023-20 and the last piece of legislation, the resolution 2023-R4. Or, since he's already up here.
Good evening.
Is that his new name?
I have going to speak on 3 ordinances tonight, mostly to do, or all to do with the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan. I sent out a chart earlier today that kind of helped drive this home because there's layers and we're getting it from several different sources, and we've created 4 different ones for this. Kind of going from left to right, we received, there was when the current presidential administration went into office, they pushed through the American Rescue Plan Act. It shoved money in several different directions. We're getting it from 2 of those sources. First of all, there was $350 billion that went into the state and local fiscal recovery fund. We got a portion of that passed through OMB or OBM, and we've received $1.4 million. That is what is requested in Ordinance 2023-25. That is to elect to use the standard allowance, which is one of the purposes that you could use for those funds were to offset lost revenue. We received under $10 million. We were eligible to make that election, and which means we can use those funds to provide general government services. We will be using ours similar to how we used a portion of our CARES Act funding back in 2020 for general fund police regular hours of compensation. That's what Ordinance 2023-25 relates to. We've also received 3 kind of rounds of funding through the ARPA, First Responder Wellness, Recruitment, Retention, and Resilience Grant. Chief Nesbitt's group, specifically Walt Cordes, did a lot of work to sort of champion this cause and put the application together. It was kind of put together as one big application. We were a little surprised when it came through in 3 different allotments. Late last year, we created Fund 243 to account for, over the next 2 years, $650,000 towards 3 firefighters. We did legislation in that late in the fall, and it kind of appropriated that in the 2023 budget. Here, just recently in the last week or 2 or 3, we received 2 additional awards, and that is what is covered in ordinances 31E and 32E. The first one was the Wellness Initiative to provide some wellness services that police and fire kind of jointly requested, totaling $51,000. Ordinance 31 authorizes the Safety Service Director to sign off on those and also approves the acceptance of those dollars. 32, this creates the fund. These will be accounted for in Fund 242. And then we just last week received notification that we received funding for 3 police officers that will kind of help with the sort of upcoming, we have a lot of attrition that's kind of banked up into the next couple of 2 or 3 years. And this will sort of help offset the onslaught of cycling through of new patrol officers. And kind of the same fashion, Ordinance 31E authorizes Jim to sign off on those documents, accepts the dollars, and Fund 32 creates Fund 241 for us to account for those. We'll be coming back probably here in a couple of weeks. We're going to sharpen our pencil. This is split over 2 years. All three of those, the $1.4 million for the state local recovery fund, we will spend those here in the next quarter or two, and cycle those dollars through and get them reported to the federal treasury that we have spent those. These other ones will be cycling through somewhat evenly from now until the end of 2024. So this will have a little bit of continued impact, not only on the 23 budget, but on the 24. So we will be coming back with a couple of appropriation ordinances for the police portion and the wellness portion here over the next couple of meetings. Any questions? I know it kind of got cumbersome there, and I kind of felt it too as I started to prepare the legislation, that it was coming through all these different directions. This one was a little bit more purpose-driven. I mean, with CARES Act, we actually had 5 allocations. They were more sorted based on the source of where they got passed through, because we got them passed through Hamilton and Butler County, and 4 of the 5 kind of had the common purpose, just different sources. So, any questions about those?
Any questions? No? I think you've been explaining it very well. Thank you.
On the other legislation, 2023-20, we talked about that 2 council sessions ago. That is the overdue update on council procedures, kind of streamlines, giving the ability to only communicate by email when necessary. I didn't have a ton of questions about that, so hopefully that sails through the voting process. On 2023-30, that's only up for a first reading, but that is subject to amendment as it goes through the 3 reading process. We had a modification to the high weeds, high grass ordinance within the past couple months, where we wanted to give code enforcement another tool instead of giving notification and waiting for a time period after a first violation. We got rid of that, and that's kind of what we're doing, the same thing with the chronic nuisance ordinance here, where a property has a nuisance activity, and one of the questions I think myself and other council members have gotten is, why does it take a while for nuisance activity to be abated once it's brought to the city's attention? It's because of our code. And so, when we get questions like that, the question we should be asking is, how can we change our code to better suit the residents? And so that's what this does. It makes the first nuisance activity within a rolling 12-month period an event, and then subsequent to that, if the same property has another nuisance activity, it does not get that same type of 30-day grace period. So that is subject to being further modified as it goes through the 3 reading process. I believe Chief Nesbitt and Mike Mathis are scheduled to join us at the next law committee. So if you have some input on how to even more fine-tune the chronic nuisance ordinance, we'd love to hear from you. And the last thing on the agenda this evening is the 2023 R04E resolution. So everybody's aware of the train derailment in eastern Ohio, and I still stand by the times that I've told residents that as a legislative body, cities, municipalities are pretty ineffective. We're not able to do much in regards to railroad legislation. State legislatures are only able to do a little bit more. It really comes down to the feds taking this under their wing. But what we can do is, as a legislative body, send some encouragement through the Ohio Municipal League. And so one of the organizations that I'm a part of, the Ohio Municipal Attorneys Association, when the derailment happened, was getting a lot of questions about, what can local municipalities do? They came up with a draft of this resolution that I fine-tuned for the city of Sharonville, and they're hoping to get a lot of responses that they can then pass on and say, hey, you know, federal legislators, please actually do something to ensure an event like this doesn't happen again. If nobody has any questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's the balance of the legislation.
Any questions for Mr. Lucas? Seeing none, I am going to first, because she's only going to take a couple minutes, I'm going to call Tina from the Sharonville Public Library up. She wanted to just give us some information briefly.
Good evening. As Ms. Hoppy said, I'm Tina Reilly, the Senior Branch Manager of your Sharonville Branch Library, and just wanted to take a quick moment to make you aware that we do offer free COVID testing at our location. We're partnering with Hamilton County Public Health and Ethos Labs. So every Thursday from 10 a.m. to noon and every Friday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. No out-of-pocket charge for that. It's in our meeting room every week. We also now have options for RSV, strep throat, and flu testing. That's either no cost or low cost depending on their situation, but the COVID testing is definitely free. Walk-ins are welcome, and there's also more information on our website, which is chpl.org. So I do attend council meetings from time to time just to absorb and keep up with all things Sharonville, and ideally I'll stop by a little more often just to give you brief updates like I did this evening. If we can ever do anything to partner or help meet the needs of, you know, residents in the community, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I've also been working with Ms. Hoppy to be on your agenda the second meeting of May to introduce our library director. Paula Bremheger will be attending to share another brief, just system-wide general update then as well. So thank you for your time. Does
Thank
anybody
you.
have any questions for me?
Mr. Wilson?
Hi.
Just question about how long does it take to get results from the COVID test?
It's
that you already-
pretty immediate. It's pretty quick. I would say less than 24 hours, but sometimes even within a couple of hours.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Thank you. Now, after we just talked about train derailments and all that fun stuff, we have a specialist that none of us knew about until I talked to him. And he threw himself under the bus, or under the train, if you will. So I would like to invite Lieutenant Mark Proust to come up and talk to us and tell us what his side gig is and how we have to send him away to train other people.
I don't know about that. So, hello. Yeah, one of my my side gigs is I volunteer as a railroad police officer for a passenger train, a steam engine up in Fort Wayne, and we kind of go across the country with this thing during the summertime. So through that, you know, I've learned a little bit about the railroads, and obviously being here for so many years and with railroads here, I've learned a thing or two. So I'm sure that most of the questions that you may have are, you know, can something like East Palestine, Ohio happen here? Are we prepared? You know, what can we do? Railroad blockages, you know, all these things like that. So I'll just take a couple of quick minutes to bring you up to speed on some of the things that I know. I'm one of a few railroad safety collision instructors here in Ohio. So we go throughout Ohio teaching first responders how to respond to railroad events and teach railroad or other police officers how to investigate railroad crimes. So some real quick statistics that you may not know. If you had to guess, what do you think causes the most fatalities involving the railroad? Would it be a car being struck by a train, or would it be a person being struck by a train, like a trespasser?
Oh,
Trespassers.
trespasser.
Last year in the United States, collision fatalities was 273. Trespasser fatality, somebody being on the tracks, walking on the tracks, was 675. So it's you know, 3 to 1. There were 2,178 collisions last year. in the United States. So what we mostly deal with is railroad collisions, but you might be concerned about, obviously, the derailments. Last year, there were 1,164 railroad derailments in the United States. That's reported by the FRA, the Federal Railway Administration. If you average that out, that's 3 a day. Now, what does the FRA classify as a derailment? The wheels come off the track. That's a derailment. So it takes the railroad 20 minutes to put the train back onto the track. I mean, we all played with those little HO trains, you know, when we were kids, and it came off the track, we just put it back on. Literally, that's exactly what happens. Less than 2% of all derailments in the United States are where it's a massive one that you see in the news, where, you know, there's cars overturned and, you know, there's, you know, trains, you know, down an embankment, or, God forbid, you know, a chemical release of some type. So it doesn't happen all that often. You know, I'll equate that to an airplane crash. I mean, how often does that happen? Yes, it does happen, but it's very, very infrequent. Most derailments occur in rail yards. We have a rail yard, and it's just the wheel slipping off of a track, and they classify that as a derailment. So, if you take a look at this, you know, these are stopping distances of various vehicles. You got cars, school buses, semi-trucks, passenger trains, and a fully loaded freight train at 55 miles an hour. How long it takes to stop. So if a train has an event of some type, it strikes a car or there's a derailment, it might not stop for quite a while if it's traveling fast. The good news is the majority of the trains, as we all know, that come through Sharonville are not traveling very fast. You know, they're just creeping into the yard or they're just slowly going down.
We can testify to that.
Exactly. Now, there's a few that come out of Cincinnati. They're called run-throughs. They'll bypass the yard and go up. They're probably doing about 45 miles an hour because they're going uphill up into Westchester. So they're pulling a lot of weight. But the majority of our trains are very slow-moving trains. Some things that we as first responders need to be aware of is electrical lines and power units. As you can see in this particular slide, there are 480 bolts that connect the engine to various power things through the train. So, you know, if we come across something, this is something that we want to avoid. So the fire departments know, you know, just like you don't stick your finger in a light socket, you know, you don't want to go up here and yank on these wires. Trains move suddenly, you know, they're stopped, you're sitting there waiting, and all of a sudden, bam, you know, you hear them start up. There's about 6 inches of slack in the coupler on each side, so it's about 1 foot. You throw 200 freight cars in there, you've probably got, you know, 30 or 40 feet of slack that can build up. So you could be sitting there, and I'm sure we've all heard the train when it starts up, you hear bang, 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 as it's starting to move. That's all that slack being taken up. So, you know, you don't want to be anywhere around, you know, a freight train when that's happening, because you could get caught into that. Trains obviously move a lot faster than you think they do. The speed limit on the the line that goes down across Kemper Road, down by Harry's Corners and things like that, before the trains started rerouting, that line was 69 miles an hour, and they came through every bit of that. Nowadays, they don't. And I've got a map, and I'm going to show you why everything moves so slowly here in Sharonville because of that. Every railroad crossing has an ENS, an emergency notification system. So it's a little blue sign that says, hey, you know, this is who owns the track that we're at, there's an emergency number to call, and it has a DOT crossing number. Just like interstates have exit route signs and mile markers, the railroads have the same thing. The problem railroads have is they have a dispatcher that runs their particular lines. Both our lines are run by Norfolk Southern. Their dispatcher is located in Atlanta, Georgia. So when you call down there and say, I've got a problem at Kemper Road, they don't know where Kemper Road is. They do know if you give them that number, oh, I know exactly where that's at. So, because they're managing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of crossings throughout, you know, their line. And keep in mind, these railroad companies are private companies. It's not the government. They're here to make money. So, we have these do not stop on the tracks for obvious reasons. We've seen that before. I remember back, you know, when Rob was, you know, an auxiliary officer, you know, and I was a new patrol officer, the Sharon Road crossing and the Kemper Road crossing didn't even have gates. They just had lights. And we were getting a fatal accident every 6 months. And we took it upon ourselves, just the one shift, second shift alone in 1 year, and we wrote about 1,500 railroad crossing violations, you know, until we forced them to get some gates in here and stop the fatalities. The fire department, police department, everybody, you know, we need to make sure that we are prepared to handle some type of an event. That's why pre-preparation is key. We know what railroads come through Sharonville. We know what crossings, where they are, and how to basically respond to some type of an event. A major derailment event is handled just like if we had a major event up on the interstate. If we had a tanker truck, you know, overturned with the same chemical and it released, we would handle it the exact same way. You know, I've handled fatal auto accidents. I had a pickup truck trapped under a tanker truck with, you know, and the driver was still in it, and the tanker truck was hauling hydrochloric acid. Okay, and that, you know, that's not something you want to mess with. So, you know, we kind of know, you know, how to respond and deal with chemical releases. You know, the fire department does it all the time. We as the police department, obviously, you know, we're not going to get right up close. Our job is going to be evacuation, traffic, and crowd control, things like that. Something major that happened like up in East Palestine, we're going to be calling in additional resources, just like they did. They called in the National Guard. They called in all these other people to help. So, you know, we certainly would do that also. The Federal Railway Administration actually has an app that you can put on your phone. So if you don't know where you're at, it hooks up to your GPS. It shows you pins you where you're at, and it tells you what crossing you're at, what DOT number you're at, so you can literally call the railroad and say, hey, here's where I'm at, here's the crossing, here's where I need help. The main thing that we need to understand and we need to know is who controls the movement on our tracks? Who owns the railroad? Luckily, both ours are owned by Norfolk Southern. The bad news is the tracks on the west side and the tracks on the east side are in two different divisions. They're handled by two different dispatchers down in Atlanta, Georgia. The one on the left side goes all the way up to Chicago. The one out of the Sharon Yard going north up to Columbus and parts north is handled by, it's out of the Dayton district. So, you know, if you call, you know, down to Norfolk Southern, you really have to tell them exactly, you know, where you're at, because it's going to depend on the dispatcher and them telling, you know, what trains need to stop and what they need to do. Usually on the side of the locomotive is a rail company name, but that does not necessarily mean that's the rail company that is running on the track. On our west side, and in Glendale, Glendale's got a set of tracks that run by their police station across Sharon Road and up into Springdale. Our tracks on the west side, basically they parallel each other. They come out of the Queensgate yard behind Union Terminal, and they parallel each other going up to Chicago. The one in Glendale is owned by CSX, ours is owned by Norfolk Southern. CSX and Norfolk Southern entered into an agreement many years ago called directional running. All the trains coming out of Queensgate, whether it's Norfolk Southern or CSX, will go north through Glendale. And all CSX, Norfolk Southern coming out of Chicago down to Cincinnati will come south through Sharon. So we have two major railroads that come through Sharonville, but Norfolk Southern owns the tracks and actually controls the line. This is the emergency fuel shutoff. So we teach first responders, like, okay, if there's a major gas leak, you know, one of these things is leaking diesel fuel everywhere, how to shut the gas off so we don't start a fire. These are all the Class 1 railroads that are in the United States. Every one but Amtrak runs through Sharonville. I have seen every one of those engines by every one of those companies come through Sharonville. Does not necessarily mean, you know, they're owned or anything. A lot of the freight railroads, they lease and borrow each other's engines. So just because it says, you know, Union Pacific on the side doesn't mean it's a Union Pacific train. It's still probably a Norfolk Southern train. The only one that doesn't come through is Amtrak. That does go through Glendale, though. Amtrak does not own any rail, actual rail, except in the extreme northeast of the United States. They lease and borrow everybody else's rail to run in the United States. So we have emergency preparedness plans. Obviously, there's, you know, firefighting, rescue, medical, etc. So this is kind of what we teach people, how to respond and how to deal with this. Firefighters are going to be dealing with, obviously, any type of spillage of some type. You know, the EPA is going to be involved, things like that. Railroad is going to send help. They want to get that line back open as quick as possible. They've got companies called RJ Corman and some other ones that are professionals. They can rewrite engines and get trains off the tracks and out of the way and cleared, you know, relatively quickly, as long as there's not a major event. A chemical or a hazardous material train coming through will have a placard just like that you see on a semi. It'll be plastered on the side. It will tell you what is inside the tank. I don't know if you can see on your screens, but on top of that tank car, those tank cars, you'll see something that looks white in color. That's actually the car number. It's actually, every train actually puts it on the roof of the top of their car in case it derails. It goes on its side. First responders can immediately figure out, okay, what am I dealing with? Everybody knows about block crossings. We'll touch on that in just a second. I thought this was pretty neat. You know, I've seen a couple of these in the nation, and I thought maybe we could get signs like this somewhere along where our trains get frequently blocked. But just as, you know, help reroute traffic. On the sides are those unique identifiers. Tells you every car that's in the consist. Train documents will tell us the railroad, the ID, the train ID, what type of rail car, where it is in the consist, what it's hauling, and if there is an emergency response plan associated with that car. The train crew will possess these documents. The conductor is responsible for having it. There's two people that are on the train, a conductor and an engineer. The engineer will never leave the cab unless, you know, he's hurt, injured, or it's derailed. The only person that will leave is the conductor, but he's the guy with all the information. Everybody's seen these flashing red lights on the end of the train. That actually transmits information back to the engineer, braking information, air pressure, things like that. They can actually apply the brakes from the back end also using that device. This is the engineer sitting up there in the control. He sits on the right side. There's different types of braking, and basically, the engine is diesel electric. And again, the conductor's on the left side. He's got all the information. If you notice in that little note down there at the bottom, generally, if there's a problem, or even before the train can move, the conductor is responsible for walking the length of the entire train to inspect it before it can move. So if your train is 1.5 miles long, he has to walk 1.5 miles down one side and 1.5 miles back on the other side. That's 3 miles before that train can move. That's why your trains are sitting and not moving. You have 2 people on the train, and only one can get off. Your dispatchers, like I said, are not located here in Sharonville. They're located many, many miles away. So by the time it takes us, I call the communication center saying, I'm at Sharon Road, I'm at this crossing number. Our dispatcher calls Atlanta. Atlanta figures out which dispatcher I need, and they communicate to the train. There might be a 5 or 10 minute delay. Signal maintainers are the guys that come out and maintain those silver boxes on the side of the crossing and the gates and the lights. Anybody see trains that go by that are tagged, all painted up? Well, obviously that's a crime, but every piece of freight has an RFID attached plate to the side. So as it travels down the tracks, periodically there are scanners that it goes by that tell everybody, like, okay, the train's good, it's upright, everything's fine, and where it is in the country, so that the dispatcher can keep track of every piece of thing. Sometimes when people deface the trains and everything, it messes up those RFID things and causes problems. So the train has to stop because it didn't get detected. Modern locomotives have black boxes, just like aircraft. I don't know why they call them black, because they're painted orange. But it covers train speed, direction, time, distance, everything that you want to know. They also have video cameras. Most of the modern locomotives have video cameras also. The bad thing is they're proprietary. We cannot, the police, we cannot get access to that, at a crash scene. They have to be taken off-site to a special place to download the information. But we do have access to it, so it will give us information as to cause, things like that. Was this a employee problem? Was this a mechanical problem? The silver boxes that are located at every corner or at every crossing also have event recorders in there, so they know it. You can tell, like, as it's coming down, how fast the train was going, how long it took the gates to go down before it got there. So we can get data from that also. These are industry resources that we have access to. All of these are great information and great things that we use during emergency responses. The Federal Railroad Administration, Chemtrek, the Emergency Response Guide, Railroad Emergency Call Center, Hazmat Response, things like that they're fantastic. Something like this happens, the cavalry's coming. I can guarantee you. There's going to be a lot of people coming. I don't know if does this play? Terry, did you
embed it?
You didn't? Okay. So anyway, on this particular, there's a app. It's another application. This is only available to first responders. It's called Ask Rail App. basically what we can do is we get to the scene of something, and so there's an overturned car of some type. I take the number off the car, I put it into this app, and it tells me what kind of car it is, what it's hauling, what railroad it is, where it's at, it'll do by GPS, and tell me how to handle that particular piece of equipment. And again, this is just available to first responders only. So, you know, we have instant information of whatever that railroad car is, whether it's a tank car, if it's, you know, they're hauling corn syrup, whatever it might be. We'll know it right away. So that's just a little bit of information about the railroad and some of the things that, you know, my presentation is generally 4 hours, so I condensed it down
thank
into.
you.
Yeah, out of 120 some odd slides, you got 20.
Thank you.
So, you want to know why all our trains stop. So, this particular map, if we turn it sideways, so you'll see this line, this track line here, and this track line here. This is the line that crosses Sharon Road if we go this way off the map. This is the line that comes out of the Sharon Yard. They meet right here at the old Newman Way crossing. So you got two lines that are merging into one. And obviously only one train can be on the track at a time. So that's why, you know, we've got trains that are blocking Sharon Road because they're stopped here. And they're, you know, 1.5 miles, 2 miles long. The back end's blocking Sharon Road because they're waiting for a train to come out of the Sharon Yard and go down here. And they can't proceed until this train is what they call a block. So everybody see those red and green signals, like what they see like right there at Hageman, you know, that's between one of those signals and another signal is called a block. There has to be another block ahead of it, so it's got to clear that first block before the next one can go, just to make sure that nobody runs into the back. Down here, this line right here is the same line that I just showed you, but this is Mitchell Avenue. Mitchell Avenue and Vine Street right here. So this is the Norfolk Southern line coming down out of Sharonville, both lines. This is the CSX line coming out of Glendale. Guess what? They all merge right here. So now, not only is Sharonville's line and the CSX line merging, and this all goes down into Queensgate, which is down behind Union Terminal. So you've got trains coming in and coming out, and you can only get one on the track at a time. So that's why everybody's stopped. The ones in the yard, they block our crossing just because they're switching. So they'll pull up and they'll back in, grab a boxcar, pull up, back in, go down another line, pick up another boxcar, and they just keep doing that. Our yard is not automated. That is, the dispatcher can't just hit a button and flip a switch to send the train to go down a different track. The conductor has to get off the train, walk all the way back, manually flip the switch. They go back, he's got to connect the car, it's got to pull forward, and he does this 100 times. And each time he pulls out, goes across Reading and Hageman, flip it back, then he backs up. Gets another one, pulls forward. And it happens, 50 times a day.
Well, that's what we need, automation.
So, there you go.
Well, thank you.
Also, the East Palestine derailment. From what we know right now, that was an equipment failure, okay, an axle. They have these things called hot box detectors about every 20 miles. And as it goes by, it scans each axle of the train and measures the temperature. It went by an axle about 20 miles before this derailment, but it wasn't hot enough to set off the detector and notify the engineer. By the time it got to the next one, it was hot enough, notified the engineer, the engineer was in the process of stopping the train when the derailment happened, but it was too late at that time. So, yeah, it can be mechanical failure also. And, you know, these trains are getting longer and longer and longer. They don't have enough employees to keep them running, you know, and therein lies some of the problems.
Thank you. Did anybody have questions? Mrs. Knight?
Yeah, today the train was stopped for an hour in front of the root beer stand, and my boss.
You offer 'em root beer?
Huh?
Did you offer 'em root beer?
No.
Oh.
There was no, I mean, it was a train. So my boss is like, okay, who do I call? Who do I call? So I'm going to give him this Norfolk Southern number to give them a call.
Here's something even easier.
Okay.
Go to the Federal Railway Administration's website, FRA. They have a little tab called Block Crossings. Tell your constituents just to go to that website.
Okay.
They will be able to pick out that particular crossing, and literally it goes right to the FRA and tells them. And so what they're trying to do is gather a lot of data to see, like, okay, where are our problems? Are we gonna? We're still subject to the feds on, you know, what happens, but they are the place to gather data. You can call Norfolk Southern, and we want you to do that too. But, you know, if
Well, now, at least now I have something to give him. Okay, Eric, here's what you do now. Instead of coming to me saying, what's Sharonville going to do? I'm like,
yeah, there's not much us at the local level have the authority to do. Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, the Ohio Supreme Court.
Mr. Cook?
Question. They used to have signs there, if the train was stopped for X amount of time, call this number. Is there a guideline of how long a train should be stopped before you contact? Nope, it's just stopped, crossing's blocked, then you can go ahead and call.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Wilson?
I'll try to keep mine question to a short answer because you've been very informative. Thank you for that. Question, you said that it takes 20 minutes to get the train back on the rail if it's just derailed and not a major accident. And so, and most of them happening in the rail yard, I believe you said. So is that equipment is it stored in the rail yard, or where does that equipment, or what equipment do we need for that?
Basically, it's called a re-railer, and all it is just a piece of equipment that they push up, and it just brings it right back onto the track.
Okay, so it's a small
Yeah.
piece of equipment.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's about this big, obviously made of steel iron, and the locomotive will push the rail car right up and right back onto the track.
Okay. Second question was, you said when there's a bigger derailment, you need to get a company like Corman.
Oh, the railroad,
Call
as soon as you call and they have a major derailment, they're gonna be coming and they're gonna be calling professional people to come in to assist to rewrite, you know, they'll need cranes and things to rewrite, you know, overturned, things.
So my question then is this, and assuming there's no explosion kind of thing, if you just gotta turn over cars, you gotta get them back on the track, and you're bringing in someone from Corman, first of all, what is the closest place where you get that kind of response, and how long would you expect it to be, roughly, just ballpark, before that train was back on the track and ready to move?
If it's an overturn, they're not gonna put it back on the track. They're gonna grab the tractor, pull it off the track, and come back later, and, because once it's overturned, you know, it's damaged. They can't put it back on and, you know, just couple everything and hope that it works. They're gonna just basically pull it off and not necessarily scrap it, but come back and haul it out of there. They're not gonna put those things back on the track.
Then how long would you expect the road to be blocked from something like that? If they stopped, you know, while I was on the, you know, blocking the road?
Oh, it could be, many hours, days.
Days, okay.
I mean, there's
I would just-
there's an R.J. Foreman in Kentucky, and, you know,
I
and
know
there's one up right off I-70 in
I know there's one in Lexington, but I didn't know if there was anything
Oh,
closer
yeah,
to that.
there's one closer.
Okay,
So
all right,
trust me, they'll fast track those guys up here.
okay.
Mr. Lip-
Days was good, I appreciate that.
Mr. Lippert?
Sure. Lieutenant Bruce mentioned the Supreme Court of Ohio and the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. So the most recent decision that I'm aware of came out of the Supreme Court of Ohio, and I don't know if Lieutenant Bruce was aware of this, but Attorney General Dave Yost is appealing that Supreme Court of Ohio decision to the Supreme Court of the United States. He's trying to get him to accept cert, which is very unlikely.
Mr. Schmidt?
The question, Lieutenant. How do you determine in a situation like this, who is the incident commander initially, and does that incident commander change as these other agencies respond? How do you go about having one person call the shots?
I got rid of it. Generally, I mean, the incident commander is going to be the fire department if it's a major incident.
Right.
You know, if there's going to be some type of spillage. You know, if an engine comes off, you've got diesel fuel, you got electrical, you got all sorts of contaminants. Even if it's just a car carrier that's loaded with a bunch of cars going from, you know, Detroit, Michigan to Tennessee, you know, you've got fluids in cars and things like that. So it's all going to be, the fire department's going to be the incident commander. They will bring in other people, other professionals who might then take over from the fire department as an incident commander. We'll probably call, obviously, if it's something big like that, I mean, Hamilton County's Emergency Management Agency is being activated. We're bringing in resources from all over, and probably somebody that is more versed in that will take over from our fire department. We're going to have a bunch of fire departments here.
And I was just wondering how you determine who makes that decision, who it's going to be, or how, when that transition of authority changes.
I'd have to check with.
Well, I'm just kind of curious. You have a protocol worked out for that, I would presume.
Yeah. Well, so under the emergency management plans and
Okay.
things like that, yeah, it says, you know, if this, then that.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you giving my report tonight. I'll pay you later. I did get an email before I came to council this evening, and I'm just going to make everyone aware. Some of you may know him or may not. Jim Greensfelder used to be on Sharonville City Council and worked for the city, and he has been placed with hospice. So if you can keep his family in your thoughts and prayers, that would be great. And that's all for my report. Clerk of Council, Mrs. Buhite.
Thanks. Just noting that the Charcuterie Creations, located at 3327 Creek Road, requested a new liquor license, and that was signed and returned to the liquor board.
Auditor, Mr. Cunningham.
Good evening, everybody. We're about 17% through the year, and our general fund has actually spent about 11%. An interesting thing can happen this time of year. We have about 22 or 23% that's actually encumbered, even though we're only 17% through the year. This time of year, we've gone through an inordinate amount of POs that were approved, and so what that does is it causes that difference, and it also affects our cash. And so, to put it in perspective, we're about $700,000 or $800,000 less in our general fund than we want to be right now. But that's just our working cash. Our actual cash on hand is a lot more than that, but that's because of what's encumbered. We expect in April that number will kind of normalize with all the receipts coming in for taxes and whatnot. So we're still in great shape. I just wanted to point that out in case you saw these reports and you saw that our general fund wasn't as high as it should be. That's the reason. That's my report.
Perfect. Treasurer, Mr. Ivory.
Thank you. As Mr. Cunningham indicated, we're about 17% of the way through the year. This being the February tax report, and the motel tax was up 12.39%, and the income tax was down again 5.74% year to date. However, looking at the estimated revenue versus what was actually been collected in our general fund totals are at 17.4%, so ahead of schedule, and the fire fund totals are at 17.8%. Convention center was 16.4%. Income tax total was 17.1%, and the motel tax was 21.7%. So we're ahead of pace so far for the year, and in terms of receipts. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Our law director, Mr. Lippert?
Very briefly, another thing that residents have talked to me about, and other council members, is problems with rental properties. And I just want to make everyone aware there is a pending state Senate bill introduced by State Senator Blessing out of Southwest Ohio. It's currently in the Ways and Means Committee, meant to curb institutional investors in properties. So I'm tracking that. I don't know when it's going to make it out of committee if it does, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Great, thank you. Does he need any backing or support from us yet?
Maybe that's something we can add to the agenda for law committee. Look into that.
Can't hurt. Okay, tonight we have our police chief, Mr. Nesbitt, for his annual report. Chief, thank you.
So I have changed my report about a dozen times, so it'll be a surprise for all of us when I give it. Can't wait to hear what I have to say. In advance of tonight's presentation, we compiled a detailed statistical report on police activities in 2022, and that was provided in advance of tonight. What I gave a hard copy of is just my PowerPoint presentation for tonight, and I will skim through a lot of the topic material that kind of defined 2022 for us. First of all, early in the year, Senior Officer Ray Hugentobler donated a handmade American flag to our fitness room. He asked if he could do that, and I was honored at his offer, and it's exceptional in quality. This photo does not do it justice in any way. In addition to Ray, I wanted to thank for all of the support and guidance that council has given, that the elected officials impart to us in public support and in private support, as well as city's management team, our community as a whole. And my biggest fear in giving this annual presentation is that I'll miss somebody and their support for us. The VFW came forward with a contribution that helped us provide training to our officers, and that training material that they donated helped us to skill our officers in the use of tourniquets, and we have already applied tourniquets on several occasions not so long ago to a young lady that needed life-saving assistance in the middle of Sharon Road. So day in and day out, the support comes back and pays dividends to our community, and we're very grateful for that. The members of my department, they contributed over 100,000 work hours last year, over 10,000 hours of overtime as part of that number, and they're giving this time, and they're earning their pay with answering more calls for service than this department has ever seen. The police leadership team, my commanders, my sergeants, the first line leaders, the leaders in our mayor's court, leaders in dispatch, are helping drive the police department to success. As you hear the remainder of the 2022 report, none of it was possible without them. They took guidance, they applied individual thought and priorities to accomplish a mission that the community can't function without. And special note to Janice Carasone. She has been the administrative assistant for many years, and she has helped the community and the police department develop 4 separate chiefs of police, me being the latest version of that. And both Mark and I have both served as acting chief at different times, and she was essential in our success during that time, and she deserves special recognition for her efforts. New hires for us included Cody Ashcroft, Christian Newsom, and Joel Altman. Cody came to us from Coleraine Township with 7 years of experience. He's a field training officer, a firearms instructor, and a SWAT team member. Christian joined us shortly after graduating Hocking College Basic Police Academy, and also had experience with the Cleveland Clinic Police Department, working with the Special Treatment Unit and mental illness teams. Joe Altman joins us after 10 years of federal law enforcement service. He is an author of children's books, a Coast Guard veteran, and still works as a bomb handling canine in support of national programs like the Super Bowl. In 2022, the police department welcomed back for the first time in many years interns. And this year, Kaylee Flem and Kira Daugherty were seniors at UC, and they had an opportunity to work with us during their internship and experience all the various aspects of Sharonville Police Department has to offer to the community. In 2022, as a new chief, we started with a lot of different goals. We wanted to establish some professional standards. We wanted to build upon our systems and programs and procedures, find some consistency, really build up our employee engagement, and talk about how best to engage our stakeholders, our community as a whole, to find out where we would evaluate and deliver our resources. And that's kind of an overview of what we hoped to accomplish in 2022. So we started with transformational change. The very first thing we had to do was, when I was promoted, there was no lieutenant. And transformational change is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot. But it basically means that we looked at what we wanted to accomplish and what we wanted to look like and what it was going to take to do that. So we initiated a review of our policy manuals, which helps our officers and employees make informed, logical decisions so we can be consistent in our approach to delivering services. We also looked at our systems and our tools that were in place, including our record management system. The clerk of courts was part of originally the Appeal 9 program, but working with the clerk of courts, we rapidly decided that that wasn't fully going to meet their needs. So working with them, we identified an alternate records management system and helped put that in place, working through 2 different IT directors. And then we started staff meetings, and that just helped us do better communication. So a structured approach to transitioning individuals and teams, our organization as a whole, from its current state to a desired future state. So that led us to look at our 5-year plan and what we wanted to accomplish. We took the priority of people focused. We looked at our Guardian Track, which is a system that's in place that we have vaguely used or partially used over many years, but now we've ramped that up. So we went from 5 categories of monitoring employee performance to over 40. So it's giving more transparent communication, two-way, formally, something that was lacking in the past, or at least was perceived as lacking. And it's helping us help the individual employee meet their goals and expectations while identifying departmental goals, expectations, so that we're all working in the same direction. So it gave us purpose and focus. Best practices, policy, we wanted to create consistency and modern training to invest in the future. There's been a lot of talk about the turnover coming in my department. Next year we may see as many as 5 retirements, but we will see 11 or more in the coming 2 to 3 years after that. So there will a great deal of change in both the staff and the leadership model and institutional knowledge within the department. Leadership development, empowerment, decentralization, and transparency were essential elements for me. I wanted everybody to understand where they stood, where they stood, what we prioritized, and where we wanted to go. That was true for my staff, working with our city. That's everybody, different departments, elected officials, city management, as well as our stakeholders within our community, and to break down any organizational challenges that we faced. Focusing on employee engagement, we looked at the commander's intent. That's what I want the department to accomplish, and how we frame that, and how do we accomplish meeting the community's needs. We looked at the wards committee, and we started that back up so our employees can be recognized for exceptional performance. And we started rotating our specialized positions. For many years, our specialized positions had gone unchanged. So we started with new detectives, school resource officer, community resource officer. As an agency in DART, which is the Drug Abuse Reduction Task Force, Sharonville was an original founding member of that agency, but we had not had a member in DART since 2004. So 2022 was a new year for us to start that. We increased our presence in SWAT which is the law enforcement equivalent to 911. It's who we call when we have an emergency. New tools and systems included Peel 9, Baldwin, Lexipol. Lexipol is our policy program. Flock, which we've talked about several times here. We are already seeing success stories with Flock. We haven't got any of those big headline stories, but we're finding a lot of investigative leads. It's helped us led us to finding a vehicle involved in a pedestrian hit skip. It's helped us find vehicles that are associated with suspects that are doing organized type criminal activity from state to state that are coming into our community. Axon, which was a major investment that we could not have done without your support, but it'll help us manage our electronic evidence much more effectively and reduce the overall personnel hours it takes to deliver evidence and community needs for our body cameras and car cameras. We worked with Mike Mathis as the hotel liaison to develop and expand the nuisance ordinance. I think it was mentioned earlier this evening even. Strategies and engagement with the hotels, develop partnerships and relationships, and how we could better make Sharonville a destination community. In 2022, the 20-year trend was a 73% increase in overall calls for service since 2001 to 2022, up about 8,000 calls for service. Now, 2001 is the last time that we added police officers to the police department, but in 2023, we are already earmarked to address that. We discussed that earlier with some of the grant money that's coming in, and also last year's commitment to add additional resources to the police department. We're hoping to raise our potential to meet the demands of the community. In 2022, Mike Mathis's efforts in the hotels saw nearly a 10% decrease in calls for service at hotels. But unfortunately, that was offset by a 1,600 additional calls for service in the same time frame. Part of our community engagement model was driven by Lieutenant Walt Cordes, who attended CLE. And as part of his CLE project, it was to identify what we could do with our resources and what tools you had given us for both personnel and equipment. And three areas were identified through our community survey and other surveys. But traffic enforcement and our presence in our communities were top winners as far as community interest, as well as drug enforcement. We were able to come up with plans that addressed all three of the top tier concerns of the community. Traffic safety proposal is one of those. As mentioned earlier, 3 officers are going to be assigned to a traffic safety unit as we develop it, and we are in the hiring process now to make that a reality. In 2022, we had a variety of critical incidents, and it speaks to the demands on our officers. Many, many, many more calls than ever before are 2 and 3 officer type calls. And when we field a patrol of 4 officers, it leaves us wanting to be able to deliver services for other needs. So we often find ourselves triaging how we allocate our resources. So our 2023 growth will help address that as well. Everybody remembers the Princeton school shooting, folks. One of the things that the growth in 23 is going to allow us to do is more training, to be better prepared for that. But in 2022, we were able to conduct officer training, both in partnership and in solo engagement, so we could address threats in our community, not just at our schools, but certainly that was part of it. Leadership, it takes leadership to accomplish all of these goals and to deliver all these statistical success stories. So this is Sergeant Danny Lee graduating from STEP, which is the Supervisor Training Education Program. It is designed to help advance our leadership, and it is the first line school that we go to. Here, Walt Cordes is pictured at his graduation from CLE, which is the Certified Law Enforcement Executive Program. The department has only ever had 3 graduates from that program. It is a 14-month program. It's very intensive. But part of his capstone material was both how to engage the community and get feedback from them, and then how best to utilize that information and how we develop our training to meet those needs, and also what allocation of resources is most effective to meet those needs. So we have drawn greatly on his work, and as a graduate myself, it is a very worthwhile program. We have another sergeant that's enrolled in it as we speak. Here are 2 of our very informal, but essential leaders within the department. On the left is Ryan Spencer, on the right is Sean Grogan. Both Ryan was the Employee of the Year, Civilian of the Year, and Sean, of course, got Officer of the Year. These two contributed immensely to the police department and our overall success. All of these things are about making it to retirement. And here Cindy Britton made it to retirement. We were sad to see her go, but very happy for her at the same time. Early in 2022, we lost Rich Usher, and that was a blow to us. Rich lost his battle with cancer. We rallied around the family and continue to support them. Every fall, you see us wearing beards, and the proceeds go in part to the family. And also in May, May 15th to be exact, was Steve Vanover's birthday, and we dedicated the building on that day, and we were grateful for all the support working through that loss. Our department is just part of this community, but this community is part of who we are. And in this picture, there's a montage of things that are there. Kevin at the pancake breakfast at the Goose, Jack, the winner of our best beard contest for the year, and our team as we rallied around Stephanie as she fought against cancer and continues to be successful in that battle. So, in summary, that's 2022 for us, and we could not accomplish it without you all. Going forward in 23, we're going to keep doing more of the same. We're going to set some SMART goals, some stretch goals. We're going to keep identifying the challenges that we have and find out better ways of doing the business that we do to deliver services to this community. We're going to keep building our employees, and we're going to keep striving for success.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions? Mr. Cook?
When is Light Ohio Blue?
Light Ohio Blue, it is a program that happens in the winter, and it is a time to show support for law enforcement as a profession. We offer light bulbs that you can put on your front porch to show your solidarity there, and there are other programs year to year. It changes, but for the most part, that's the gist of it.
Anyone else? Thank you very much for all you guys do.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Are there any residents that wish to be heard this evening? Seeing none, council committees, community development, Mr. Wilson?
Yes, just a reminder that we will meet on the Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning Commission will meet on April the 19th this month, which is a week later than usual. The BZA will meet at 6:30, and there are 3 items on the agenda. 2 separate requests for variance to allow a trailer on residential property, one on Woodward Lane, one on Maywood Drive. There's the third item is an appeal of a zoning enforcement code on Woodward Lane, separate address there. And then the Planning Commission will meet right after the Board of Zoning Appeals adjourns, and there are also 3 items on there. The first item will be a flood damage reduction ordinance update. Then we have, the second item is a site plan review to allow U-Haul truck leasing on Lebanon Road at the Days Inn. And the third item is update on future redevelopment of the Lebanon Road at Northfield Services LLC.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on. Community Services, Mr. Lovett.
Thank you. No report today. Our next meeting is Wednesday, April 5th in the conference center, the conference room. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Budget and Finance and Project Oversight, Mr. Cook.
Thank you. Project Oversight met on March 14th to discuss the overage costs for the convention center. And then moving on to Budget and Finance, we will have our next meeting on April the 11th at 6 p.m. in the administrative conference room. Thank you.
Thank you. Honored citizens, Mrs. Knight.
Yes, tonight I am honoring all Sharonville veterans, especially our Vietnam War veterans. Tomorrow is Vietnam War Veteran Day. Also, I'd like to say thank you to all our vets, especially our Vietnam War vets. Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice. Law and Public Safety, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you. The next meeting for the Law and Public Safety Committee will be Tuesday, April 4th, 4 p.m., Administrative Conference Room. Thank you.
Thank you. Rule suspension motion, first and only reading with immediate effectivity for ordinances 2023-25, 2023-26E, 2023-27E, 2023-28E, 2023-29E, 2023-31E, and 2023-32, and resolution 2023-R04E. Is there a motion? So moved by Mr. Lovett, second by Mr. Wilson. Is there any discussion on this? All those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no. And that does carry. We will move to unfinished business. Ms. Swoop.
Okay. Third reading of ordinance 2023-19, establishing a policy for the repair or replacement of resident mailboxes damaged by city snowplow operations.
Perfect, thank you. Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2023-19? So moved by Mr. Tankersley, second by Mrs. Knight. Is there any discussion on this ordinance? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Tankersley,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mr. Coulter,
Yes.
Mr. Levitt,
Yes.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
Mrs. Knight,
Yes.
and Mr. Schmidt.
Yes.
Ordinance 2013-19 has been approved. Third reading of ordinance 2023-20, amending Chapter 121 of the Sharonville Codified Ordinances regarding council procedure.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2023-20? So moved by Mr. Cook, second by Mr. Schmidt. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Tankersley,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mr. Coulter,
Yes.
Mr. Levitt,
Yes.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
Mrs. Knight,
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt.
Yes.
Ordinance 2023-20 has been approved.
Thank you. New business, please.
All right. First and only reading of ordinance 2023-25, authorizing the use of the standard allowance for the local fiscal recovery fund as authorized by the American Rescue Plan Act and amending 2023 appropriations for the 245 American Rescue Plan Act fund.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2023-25? So moved by Mr. Coulter, second by Mr. Wilson. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Tankersley,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mr. Coulter,
Yes.
Mr. Levitt,
Yes.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
Mrs. Knight,
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt.
Yes.
Ordinance 2023-25 has been approved. First and only reading of emergency ordinance 2023-26E, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract for the design of Mosteller Road Improvement Project, to bid the project, to award a contract to the lowest and best bidder, and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2023-26E? So moved by Mrs. Knight, second by Mr. Lovett. Is there any discussion? Mr. Schmidt.
Just a special thank you to Steve for all his work on that.
Perfect, thank you. Any other? And we'll go to roll call.
Mr. Tankersley,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mr. Coulter,
Yes.
Mr. Levitt,
Yes.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
Mrs. Knight,
Yes.
and Mr. Schmidt.
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2023-26E has been approved. First and only reading of emergency ordinance 2023-27E, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into contracts for construction of a sidewalk on Lebanon Road from Cottingham Drive to the Anchor Property Development and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2023-27E? So moved by Mr. Tankersley, second by Mr. Lovett. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Tankersley,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mr. Coulter,
Yes.
Mr. Levitt,
Yes.
Mr. Cook,
Yes.
Mrs. Knight,
Yes.
and Mr. Schmidt.
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2023-27E has been approved. First and only reading of emergency ordinance 2023-28E, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract for the design of the Kemper Road Path repaving project, to bid the project, to award a contract to the lowest and best bidder, and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2023-28E? So moved by Mr. Coulter, second by Mr. Wilson. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Coulter?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2023-28E has been approved. First and only reading of emergency ordinance 2023-29E, authorizing the Safety Service Director to enter into a contract to perform a feasibility study for the construction of a sidewalk along the north side of Fields Erdel Road and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2023-29E? So moved by Mr. Cook, second by Mr. Lovett. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Coulter?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt? Okay. Emergency ordinance 2023-29E has been approved. And a first reading of ordinance 2023-20, amending section 521.17 of the Sharonville Codified Ordinances regarding chronic nuisances. First and only reading of ordinance 2023-31E, accepting 2 additional ARPA First Responder Wellness Recruitment, Retention, and Resiliency Grant Awards through Ohio Emergency Management Agency, and amending the salary ordinance for additional police department staff and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2023-31E? So moved by Mrs. Knight, second by Mr. Lovett. Is there any discussion on it? Mr.
Just a second one, a special thank you to Scott for all his explanations at Law Committee, because it was really excellent, Scott. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We like your drawings too. That helps us.
Yeah, he has to work Law Committee through those, and he does a
Yep.
really nice job. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
All right, Mr. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Coulter?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Schmidt? Ordinance 2023-31E has been approved. First and only reading of emergency ordinance 2023-32E, establishing ARPA First Responders Grant Police Fund, ARPA First Responders Grant Wellness Fund, and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass ordinance 2023-32E? So moved by Mr. Tankersley, second by Mr. Coulter. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Coulter?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency ordinance 2023-32E has been approved. First and only reading of emergency resolution 2023-R04E, urging the legislative branches of the federal government, as well as the state of Ohio, to enact legislation to further protect the citizens of the city of Sharonville, Ohio, from the inherent dangers of a train derailment on the tracks located in our city and declaring an emergency.
Is there a motion to pass resolution 2023-R04E? So moved by Mr. Wilson, second by Mr. Cook. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, roll call.
Mr. Tankersley?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Coulter?
Yes.
Mr. Lovett?
Yes.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mrs. Knight?
Yes.
And Mr. Schmidt?
Yes.
Emergency Resolution 2023-R04E has been approved. Drop the mic.
Another opportunity for residents this evening? No one wants to talk? Any other matters to be heard before council tonight? Seeing none, is there a motion for adjournment? So moved by Mr. Tankersley, second by Mrs. Knight. All those in favor, yes?
Yes.
Those opposed, no, and we are adjourned. There's cookies over there, peeps, if you want to eat cookies.